Good morning. I'm Andrew Large from the Confederation of Paper Industries, and I'd like to take a few minutes of your time today to talk about the risks of a no deal Brexit. I'd like to acknowledge the support of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in funding the cost of the production of this video, and also the Food and Drink Federation for assisting us in bidding in consortium for this work. I'd also like to thank the Paper Industry Technical Association, BPBIF Cartons, the Sheep Plant Association and the Wood Panels Industry Federation, who are all collaborating with us to ensure that this video is distributed as widely as possible to businesses across the UK that are interested in planning for a no deal Brexit. The key message here is that Brexit is an exercise in risk management, and there are two significant risks. The first is that the risk of a no deal Brexit itself is significant. We don't know what will happen on the 31st of October, and neither do you. So it's prudent to consider what might happen and plan accordingly. The second risk is that a no deal Brexit could bring significant challenges to your business that you will need to manage. And the rest of this video is about assisting businesses to try and understand what are their risks and how they can act in order to manage them. The current position on Brexit is that the UK is scheduled to leave the EU on the 31st of October 2019, with or without a deal. Now, the EU 27 and the UK government need to agree a deal. If that happens, the European Parliament needs to ratify it, and then the UK Parliament needs to ratify it. So there really isn't a lot of time left to get a deal in place. And in the UK, unfortunately, government, Parliament and the courts are in conflict as to what might happen. And all of this has therefore generated uncertainty, which means that businesses really do need to plan on the basis that no deal is a realistic possibility for the end of October. So what then can businesses do to plan and make themselves ready for the risks of a no deal Brexit? Well, there are a number of key risks of no deal, and as you might imagine, they cover the different inputs and outputs into individual businesses. So there are risks around trade, there are risks around business logistics and vehicle haulage, there are risks around customs, there are risks around the customer and supplier exposure of your supply chain, there are risks around changes to regulations, there are risks around potential changes to legal and contractual terms. There are risks around the changes to immigration law and what might happen with regard to your employees. And also there are risks around communications and the reputation of your business. So looking at the first of these, trade, the key risk is that you might not be able to trade as easily with the EU 27 as you have done beforehand. Now, the EU 27 and the UK have no tariffs on paper or its products. And there might also be the reimposition of tariffs in third countries where the UK has left European Union free trade areas. Also, there may be non-tariff barriers that are introduced, compliance checks at the border, imposition of Basel Convention rules for recovered paper shipments. And there is also the question of rules of origin, and the particular question of whether you understand what is the legal origin in customs terms of your products and whether you would be able to comply with an EU 27 request to make such information available. Thinking now about logistics, there is a clear risk that logistics could be disrupted. You may have heard some media talk about Operation Brock or Operation Yellowhammer, and the sort of things that could happen, as happened in the 2015 ferry strike, are many hours of delays, particularly at the Channel ports. Dover in particular, in the event of a no deal Brexit, is predicting quite some significant challenges. So what can be done about that? Well, possibly you may be able to stockpile some material. You may be able to time a shutdown for early November so as to minimise your exposure. Perhaps you're beginning to work with your hauliers to try and work out whether you'll be able to get more lorry capacity. Are there potentially alternative ports and alternative transport types you could use? So moving from ro-ro ferry to containerised ferry. And finally, are you going to be able to work with your hauliers in order to ensure that they have the right driving and vehicle licences in place so that their drivers and their lorries will be able to operate smoothly inside the EU 27? A further risk with regard to Brexit is that you may have incorrect documents that will lead to delays in shipments and to your vehicles being blocked at the border while the correct documents are found. What's important is to understand whether your business has any experience of trading outside the EU, European Economic Area or EFTA. Do you really understand what document will be needed? For example, the government is already issuing EORI numbers to companies that trade existing trading relationships with countries outside the UK. But it may well be that if you're a new importer or exporter, you would need to physically go and get such a number for yourselves. I would very much encourage you to look at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy's website, look at their flowcharts for traders both importing and exporting, and make sure that you have got the information that you need in order to keep operating. Similarly, there is the HMRC Partnership Pack, which is being regularly updated, and in a no deal that will replace the Union Customs Code in the UK. We need to be very clear about what border checks will be in place. It is highly likely that customs officials across the EU 27 will be looking for the new documents from day one. And it's absolutely vital that you have the right documentation in place so as to be able to pass smoothly across these new borders that would be created in the event of a no deal Brexit. One of the major risks is also that your customers and suppliers may not be able to trade with you as they have been doing before in the event of a no deal Brexit. What's important is to understand who your customers and suppliers are, who their customers and suppliers are, so you see where you sit in their supply chain, their supply web even perhaps, and you're able to really understand what exposure does your total supply chain have to a no deal Brexit and how might you be able to mitigate it. And there are a number of customers who are highly likely to be disrupted, particularly the food and drink sector, manufacturing industries such as aerospace, automotive, chemicals, and also suppliers of machinery, equipment and spares into the UK paper industry. And it's vital that you start communicating to those customers and suppliers as quickly as possible, and that you're able to plan and manage any risks and make sure that if you need to have material pre-supplied or pre-ordered, that is done, and that you know exactly how you're going to be able to manage any particular customs or logistical problems as you're moving ahead into November after a potential no deal Brexit. One of the key risks that you might have is that of regulatory change that might damage your business. There are a large number of EU regulations, thousands, that in the risk of a no deal Brexit would change overnight on the 31st of October. To think of a couple of examples, you may have products that are EU eco-labelled, and you will need to change how you interface with the EU eco-label to ensure that they're being tested and certified in an EU 27 country after Brexit. In the event of a no deal Brexit, EU ETS would cease to apply, and in that case there would be a carbon tax of £16 per tonne that would be unilaterally applied in the UK. The UK chemicals would no longer be registered to REACH, and again that might cause significant problems in terms of securing properly certified chemical supply. The EU timber regulation would cease to apply in the UK, and therefore for areas such as pulp and paper imports and exports, or even the use of pallets for transporting of goods, there will be changes to the regulations that would be required to be complied with as a result of Brexit. And finally, UK products could no longer be CE marked, and perhaps they would need to therefore be UK conformity assessment marked, the UKCA mark that government has recently launched. Again, we don't know what the situation will be on the 31st of October, but in the event of a no deal Brexit, there would be an overnight change in the regulatory requirements for your business, and you would need to engage with those regulatory requirements and make sure that you've understood what the change might be for your business and how you would be able to manage that risk. And these changes with regulatory compliance would also potentially bring legal and contract changes. There are indeed risks that EU exit would place you in breach of contract. One of the areas that you would need to be clear about is which law governs your contracts and where would matters be settled in court. So, for example, do any of your contracts mention the UK's membership of the EU or rely on provisions that can only be fulfilled as a result of such membership? You might, for example, have a provision in your contract that says that you will use only REACH-registered chemicals in your products, but that may not be accessible to you in the event that the UK leaves the European Union and your UK chemicals supplier can no longer REACH-register their products. Again, technically putting you in breach of contract. Moreover, what if Brexit-related disruption prevents you from meeting a contractual requirement? Perhaps there would be delays at the ferry ports, which means that you wouldn't be able to meet the requirements to be on time and in full. Perhaps you wouldn't be able to provide service staff because of changes in immigration law and right to work law as a result of Brexit. And finally, your warranties and your trade terms and conditions may also themselves need to change in order to ensure that you're not providing something as part of those warranties or terms and conditions that Brexit then prevents you from delivering upon in the event that you need to. One of the fundamental risks from Brexit is that you may lose access to skilled and experienced employees. The 31st of October 2019 becomes the cut-off date for the EU settlement scheme that the government has announced in the event of a no deal Brexit. If you've been here in the UK for 5 years prior to that date, then you will be given settled status immediately. If, on the other hand, you've been here for less than 5 years, you'd be given pre-settled status to be converted to settled status when you've reached the 5-year period. The deadline to apply in the event of a no deal Brexit is the 31st of December 2020. And beyond that, as we understand it at the moment, current UK rules and processes would apply. Clearly this has implications for both current UK and EU 27 staff and for staff from the rest of the world as well. And businesses need to understand what their future staffing needs would be, what their recruitment routes and processes are, and how they would manage the non-UK workforce without running any risks of discrimination. And this is important not just for your own employees, but also for your subcontractors and your service staff, so that anybody who works on your premises may potentially not be able to do so as a result of a no deal Brexit, and you need to be sure that you've got processes in place to manage that and the unlikely outcome that people are no longer able to work. Communications is one of the biggest areas of concern as a result of a no deal Brexit, and there's a risk that failure to communicate may damage your trading relations, your staff morale and your reputation. And you need to have clear plans to communicate about Brexit to your employees, to your customers and your suppliers about Brexit-related issues, what you're doing to manage the risks, and how that you're going to be able to continue to operate your business come what may on the 31st of October. You need to make sure that your communications instill confidence, particularly in your workforce. What do you need to tell them about your preparations? What do you also need to tell your customers and suppliers about your preparations? And what questions do you need to ask of them to ensure that you're able to play your part in the whole supply chain to manage the risks of a no deal Brexit and ensure that you're able to continue to operate as you did before? So to conclude, this is an exercise in risk management. And just as with any exercise of risk management, one needs to be clear about what can your business control, what can it influence, what would be most likely to cause an impact, and which of those impacts would be most damaging. And you need to act now by looking systematically with your customers, with your suppliers and with your workforce about what the key risks are to your business as a result of a no deal Brexit, and acting to manage those risks. You'll reduce the possibility of an adverse impact to your business from a no deal Brexit, and in doing so you'll be able to grow and have your company thriving in the way that it would have been able to do so if a no deal Brexit hadn't happened. Thank you.